What is Art Deco?
Art Deco is a term that describes a style of decorative arts popular during the 1920s and 1930s. Though the term was coined later. Art Deco, originally called Style Moderne, began in France and gained prominence after the Exposition Internationale des Arts Décoratifs et Industriels Modernes, an art and design expo held in Paris in 1925. Art Deco is characterized by the merging of fine arts with decorative arts and emphasized new support for the craftsman over the factory. Art Deco objects, illustrations, and buildings are often highly ornamental, something that was criticized by other modernist designers and writers, such as Le Corbusier, who favored a more industrial aesthetic. There are often exotic elements in Art Deco design. Inspired by the discovery of King Tut's tomb in Egypt in 1922. Abstract movements such as Cubism and Futurism also inspired geometric motifs associated with Art Deco.
What movies have been made about famous artists?
Artists have been inspiring films for decades. The following is a short list of movies either about or inspired by artists. Exit Through the Gift Shop. 2010, an intriguing documentary about the enigmatic street artist Banksy. Little Ashes. 2008, Robert Pattinson plays Salvador Dali in a film about the artist's relationships with filmmaker Luis Buñuel and writer Federico Garcia Lorca. Factory Girl, 2006. A dramatic look at Edie Sedgwick's relationship with Andy Warhol. Klimt. 2006, John Malkovich plays the Austrian artist Gustav Klimt. Modigliani, 2004. A dramatic romance that focuses on the rivalry between artists Modigliani and Picasso in Paris. The Girl with the Pearl Earring, 2003. A film inspired by a novel by Tracy Chevalier that was in turn inspired by the famous painting by Jan Vermeer. Frida. 2002, Salma Hayek and Alfred Molina star as Frida Kahlo and Diego Rivera, respectively. Pollock, 2000. Starring Ed Harris as abstract expressionist painter Jackson Pollock. Marcia Gay Harden won the Academy Award for her portrayal of Lee Krasna. Goya in Bordeaux. 1999, a dramatic Spanish-language film about the artist Francisco de Goya. Surviving Picasso. 1996, Anthony Hopkins stars as Pablo Picasso in this film about the women in his life. Basquiat. 1996, a biopic of the postmodernist artist Jean-Michel Basquiat. I Shot Andy Warhol. 1996, Lily Taylor stars as Valerie Solanese, who shot Andy Warhol in 1968. Vincent and Theo, 1990. Robert Altman directs this film about the relationship between brothers Vincent and Theo van Gogh. Camille Claudel. 1988, a French film about sculptor Camille Claudel and her relationship with Auguste Rodin. Auberai, 1986. Donald Sutherland plays French artist Paul Gauguin.
What is the post and lintel system?
The post and lintel system is the oldest and simplest architectural construction, in which two upright forms, called posts, support the load of a horizontal beam, known as a lintel. The posts must be strong, and close, enough to prevent the lintel from weakening in the middle, especially if the lintel is carrying the heavy load of a wall or a roof.
What is a pagoda?
Derived from the Indian stupa. A pagoda is a tall tower notable for its repeated rooflines featuring upturned eaves. Pagodas are one of the most recognizable examples of East Asian architecture, often found at the center of Buddhist temple complexes. Early pagodas were solid structures and therefore could not be entered, and were made of stone, brick, and wood. The Fo Guang Si Pagoda in Yingxian, China, built in 1056 and designed to house relics, is still the tallest wooden building in the world, at 9 stories.
What is the Caroline script?
In the early medieval period, scribes were responsible for hand-copying illuminated manuscripts. And although these scribes were specially trained, penmanship was overall quite poor, and scribes did not follow a specific set of rules when writing. During the Carolingian period, Carolingian is an adjective used to indicate the rule of Charlemagne and his descendants. A new system of writing was developed, which resulted in much greater consistency from scriptorium to scriptorium. The use of majuscules, or capital letters, was based on the ancient Roman alphabet. Majuscules were used in titles and headings, and on only the most formal manuscripts. Lowercase letters, or minuscules, were quicker and easier overall, and were used for less formal writing.
What is the Villa Rotunda?
The Villa Rotunda was a residence designed by the architect Palladio in the 1560s. Palladio, who wrote 4 books on architecture, was greatly inspired by the Roman temple form. He was interested in architectural theory, ideal proportions, and the classical orders. Similar in form to the Pantheon in Rome, the Villa Rotunda is completely symmetrical, with a projecting portico on each square side, and is topped with a hemispherical dome. Palladio's work went on to inspire architects for centuries, especially in Britain and the United States.
Is Baroque a bad word?
The word Baroque comes from the Portuguese word, barroco, which means imperfect pearl. The suggestion is that while Baroque art is as lovely as a pearl, it lacks the perfection and balance characterized by the Renaissance art that preceded it. Baroque art initially was used to describe a style of art that was more dramatic and intense than art from the Renaissance. But the term is sometimes used to refer generally to the 17th century in Europe. The term Baroque can also refer to architecture, music, dance, and literature. Some of the most famous Baroque artists include Caravaggio, Bernini, Rubens, Poussin, Rembrandt, and Velázquez. As with many art historical categories, the definition of Baroque can be relatively flexible.
What are hieroglyphs?
Hieroglyphs were used by the ancient Egyptians as a formal writing system made up of a combination of pictures and alphabetic letters. The term comes from the Greek word hieros, which means sacred, and glyph, which means writing or drawing. The meaning of ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs was mostly unknown until the 18th century discovery of the Rosetta Stone, an ancient stele made of diorite upon which the same text was written in 3 languages. Ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs, another Egyptian script called the Demotic script, as well as ancient Greek. This allowed scholars to finally understand many previously untranslatable hieroglyphic inscriptions. Ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs are found on papyrus scrolls, wall paintings, and carved into stone. They often accompany images and are used to identify scenes and figures.
What is parietal art?
While mobiliary art is one of the major forms of Paleolithic art, parietal art includes non-portable art such as rock and cave paintings. Truly impressive Paleolithic paintings have been found all over the world, including Europe, Africa, and Australia, in sites that were likely used for religious or spiritual purposes, rather than as shelter. When archaeologists first discovered prehistoric cave art in Europe, they assumed the expressive, realistic images they saw must be a hoax because they didn't. Imagine that people from the Ice Age were capable of such artistic skill. Archaeological evidence, such as the discovery of nearby tools made of bone and stone, convinced them otherwise. One of the most famous examples of Paleolithic cave art is the series of paintings at the Lascaux caves in France.
Why did Alexander Calder make mobiles?
American artist Alexander Calder, 1898 to 1976, was interested in sculpture that moved, also known as kinetic sculpture. Trained as an engineer and an artist, Calder was intrigued by Piet Mondrian's experimentations of color and form, and himself created moving Mondrian's free hanging. Mobile sculptures engaged in constant physical change. Not only do Calder's works of art move, but the viewer may move around the art, allowing for ever-changing dynamic viewpoints. Calder's mobile one of those. 1972, is composed of abstract biomorphic forms that suggest organic, lively objects. Calder made more than mobiles. Other sculptural works include the 50-ton arched steel flamingo in Chicago, 1973, and the curving, fin-studded whale 2. Constructed of wood and steel in 1964 after the 1937 original, housed at the Museum of Modern Art in New York.
What is Arte Povera?
Arte povera, meaning poor art or impoverished art, is a movement that emphasized the use of everyday objects and aims to broaden just what can be considered art. The term was invented by Italian artist German Celant in 1967 and is related to similar movements such as art informal. Artists associated with Arte Povera include Greek artist Janis Kounellis, 1933, as well as Italians Giulio Paolini, 1940, and Michelangelo Pistoletto, 1933. Pistoletto is famous for his Arte Povera work, Venus of the Rags, 1967. In which a glimmering sculpture of Venus, the goddess of love, with her back turned to the viewer, is juxtaposed with a large, colorful pile of rags. Kounellis also contrasts refined classicism with the everyday in his Untitled from 1978, in which fragments of a classical sculpture are held together with cord.
Who was Jean Auguste Dominique Ingres?
The art of French painter Jean-Auguste Dominique Ingres, 1780 to 1867, exhibits a curious combination of neoclassical and romantic values, though he was determined to hold on to traditional neoclassical values and was considered a nemesis of the much looser Delacroix. He was inspired by the Renaissance painting of Raphael, as well as the revolutionary artist, Jacques-Louis David. While interested in history painting, Ingres is better known for his sensual portraits of female nudes, especially paintings such as La Grande Odalisque, 1814, which depicts a sultan's concubine reclined languidly on luxurious, colorful fabrics. La Grande Odalisque is an example of Orientalism, or a romantic interest in the exotic East. In the painting, the elongated form of the concubine, along with objects of Eastern luxury, such as a fan made of peacock feathers and ornate jewelry, were decidedly romantic. Despite Ingres' preference for neoclassicism and apparent distaste for portraiture,
Who was Artemisia Gentileschi?
like other Caravaggisti, or followers of Caravaggio. The work of female painter Artemisia Gentileschi, 1593 c. 1652, is characterized by dramatic diagonals, naturalism. Chiaroscuro, contrasts of dark and light, and powerful subject matter. She was arguably the most successful female artist of her day. She worked for the Duke of Tuscany and was the first female member of the Florentine Academy of Design. She is known for her paintings of the Old Testament story of Judith beheading Holofernes, a popular scene in the 16th and 17th centuries, and often analyzed in relation to a rape she suffered at the hands of her tutor when she was 17 years old. Male or female, Artemisia Gentileschi was one of the most skilled naturalist painters of the Baroque period.
What is the significance of ball playing in Mesoamerica?
Ball games were popular throughout Mesoamerica. And art depicting ball games exists in many Mesoamerican cultures including the Olmec, Maya, and Aztec. Archaeologists have even discovered the ruins of sunken Olmec ball courts. Not much is known about the specific rules of the game. Mayan art depicts ball players wearing protective padding, and other art shows players wearing helmets and even leather belts. It is important to note that the game wasn't just for fun, it had a serious religious significance for those who played and watched. It is possible that some ball players were forced to participate against their will and that human sacrifice played a role in the game. According to Mayan mythology, ball games were symbolic of the cycle of life, death, and regeneration.
Where is the ancient Near East?
The ancient Near East is a term used by art historians to refer to the area near the Tigris and the Euphrates rivers, also called Mesopotamia. Mesopotamia is a Greek word that means the land between two rivers. The ancient Near East is also thought of as the cradle of civilization, as it is here that urban society developed for the first time. With it came the invention of writing and laws. The first examples of epic poetry, the construction of cities, and of course, monumental art and architecture.
What are the major periods of Mesoamerican art?
Mesoamerican art, art of Mexico and Central America, is divided into three main categories: the pre-classic period, c. 1200 B.C.E.300 CE classic period, c. 300 to 950 post-classic period, c. 950-1521. The post-classic period ended quite suddenly when the major indigenous empires of the Americas fell to the Spanish conquistadores led by Hernán Cortés.
What makes the Mona Lisa such a great work of art?
Her face is everywhere, from backpacks to refrigerator magnets. She occasionally sports a mustache and glasses, and her head has even been replaced by Bart Simpson's. But make no mistake, thousands of people a year crowd around the real thing hanging in the Louvre in Paris.
Why is the cover of the Lindau Gospel so luxurious?
This astonishing book cover, decorated with pearls, sapphires, emeralds, garnet, and gold, was not originally intended for the 9th century Lindau Gospels. Though it has been associated with this manuscript since before the 16th century. The book cover was made at a monastic workshop during the reign of Charles the Bald, Charlemagne's grandson, who ruled from 840 to 877, and represents Christ on the cross. Christ is surrounded by mourning figures, but stands erect with his palms forward, and stares powerfully ahead. The work was made in a style known as repoussé, which means the figures were hammered into low relief from the back of the metal cover. The fine gold reflects glittering light, and the jewels evoke heavenly Jerusalem. The obvious luxury of the cover indicates the inherent value of books during the medieval period. And the richness of the materials emphasize the triumph of Christ, foreshadowing the resurrection.
What is a flying buttress?
A flying buttress is a graceful masonry support that projects from the side of a wall and adds strength to arches and piers that bear heavy loads. Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris is known for its flying buttresses, some of which can be seen on the exterior of the apse. The delicate cascade of the flying buttress belies its serious structural role. Without the flying buttress, Gothic cathedrals could not have reached the awesome heights they are known for.
How did Japanese art change during the Meiji period?
The Meiji period lasted from 1868 to 1912, and during this time oil painting became popular in Japan after Japanese artists were exposed to Western styles of art. Subjects popular during the Edo period, such as courtesans, were still popular during the Meiji period. For example, in 1872, Takahashi Yuichi painted Warren, Grand Courtesan, a Western-style portrait painted in oil, but that incorporates patterns and colors used in ukiyo-e paintings. In this painting, Takahashi Yuichi, 1828–1894, depicts the elegant sitter's brightly colored garments as disparate, abstract sections of color and texture, a technique derived from traditional Japanese painting. Western styles were so popular during the Meiji period that some artists were concerned that Japan would lose its own distinctive style. Traditional artists such as Yokoyama Taken 1853 to 1908, wanted to breathe life into Japanese styles of painting by infusing them with some Western techniques. But to emphasize their Japanese character in a style known as Nihonga.
Is the Venus de Milo an example of ideal beauty and poise from the classical period? Or was she made during the more garish and later Hellenistic period?
Many 19th-century scholars were convinced that she was an example of classical sculpture due to stylistic similarities with the work of classical master Praxiteles. Modern art historians now think she was made around 150 BCE, which would place her firmly in the Hellenistic period. They also cite the erotic tension caused by the way in which her robes are just about to slip off of her half-nude figure as being more in line with Hellenistic taste. It is perhaps the mystery that surrounds the Venus de Milo that adds to her beauty and attraction. One might wonder if she would be half as engaging with both of her arms completely intact.
Why is St. Mark's Basilica in Venice considered an example of Byzantine architecture?
During the pre-modern era, the Italian city of Venice had many political and cultural ties to the regions east of Italy, and was therefore quite influenced by the culture and art of the Byzantine Empire. St. Mark's Basilica is a grand architectural example of this influence, and was especially inspired by the Church of the Holy Apostles in Constantinople. The basilica, whose chapel holds the relics of St. Mark the Apostle, is divided into 5 sections, each topped with a dome. The interior walls are covered in marble and over 8,000 square feet of glittering mosaics, many of which illustrate stories from the life of St. Mark. The style is similar to that of Byzantine mosaic designs found at San Vitale in Ravenna and other Eastern European churches. The mosaics were a work in progress for hundreds of years, and the basilica was consecrated as a cathedral in 1807.
What is Masaccio Trinita?
Known by his nickname, Masaccio, lengthily named Tommaso di Ser Giovanni de Moncasai, was an early Renaissance painter whose work blended the realism of Giotto with the concepts of perspective established by Brunelleschi. His monumental fresco, Trinity with the Virgin, St. John the Evangelist, and donors was painted in the Church of Santa Maria Novella around 1426. This illusionistic fresco appears to be a three-dimensional niche in the wall in which Christ, impaled on the crucifix, hangs above an altar, framed by painted pilasters in the classical order. and a barrel-vaulted ceiling, the pale, emaciated Christ is frail yet powerful. God the Father, depicted in the form of a man, towers over him from behind while a white dove, symbol of the Holy Spirit, floats just above Christ's halo. Somber representations of the Virgin Mary in blue, and St. John the Evangelist in red, draw the viewer's attention to the plight of Christ. While outside the sacred arched space occupied by the saints, the patrons kneel in prayer. Just below the scene is the image of an entombed skeleton with the proclamation, "What you are, I once was. What I am, you will be." The realism of the figures and the use of single point perspective effectively trick the eye into imagining that these figures are present within the confines of Santa Maria Novella, sending a powerful message of the importance of salvation.
What is prehistoric Jericho?
Prehistoric Jericho, also known as Tel el Sultan, is one of the most important Neolithic sites excavated by archaeologists, and contains key examples of Neolithic art and architecture. Prehistoric people had settled at the Jericho site as early as 12,000 BCE, and domestication of animals began around 9000 BCE. The architecture of Neolithic Jericho included mud brick houses with plastered floors, which were painted red and white, as well as evidence of sophisticated fortifications including 22 a 28-foot high stone tower and 20-foot high walls surrounding the village. By 7000 BCE, as many as 2,000 people may have lived in Neolithic Jericho.
Who is Aiwai?
Aiwai, 1957, is a Chinese contemporary artist and political activist known for working in a variety of media, including painting, sculpture, and installations. Wei, who has shown his work internationally, was arrested by Chinese police in 2011 and detained for tax evasion, and has since not been allowed to leave the country or speak publicly about his arrest. Aiwai's work is often political, contemplative, and humorous. Many of his works, such as his Colored Vases, 2006, series, evoke a sense of emptiness.
Who was Frida Kahlo?
Frida Kahlo, 1907 to 1954, may have been married to Diego Rivera, but her style of painting was highly individual and eschewed the monumentality of many of her male counterparts who were part of the Mexican muralist movement. Kahlo's autobiographical self-portraits had more in common with miniature paintings, and she was highly influenced by Mexican folk painting. Although not officially considered a surrealist, many of her paintings focus on themes of emotion and psychology through slightly disturbing, dreamlike imagery. Her painting, The Two Fridas, 1939, depicts two seated self-portraits. One dressed in a European-style dress and the other in traditional Mexico clothing. Representing her dual heritage, her father was German and her mother was Mexican. The anatomically detailed hearts of both Fridas can be seen through their chests, each connected with a long, thin blood vessel that wraps around them. The Frida on the left holds a pair of scissors and she cuts the vessel, blood spilling from the tip. This is thought to represent both Aztec sacrifice and the lifelong pain she suffered after a traumatic bus accident in 1925. Other famous works by Kahlo include Self-Portrait with Thorn Necklace, 1940, and Self-Portrait on the Border Between Mexico and the United States, 1932.
What is photography?
In Greek, phos means light and graph means drawing. Therefore, photograph literally means light drawing. The word itself gives insight into the process of photography, which was invented in the 19th century, and involves capturing fixed images through the exposure of light-sensitive materials using a camera. A camera is essentially a light-proof box with photographic film inside. The photographer focuses the camera on a desired scene and then briefly exposes the film to the light from the scene by quickly opening and closing the camera's shutter. Light-sensitive chemicals covering the film react to the light. In a dark room, the film is submerged into developer to make a negative image. It is now common for contemporary photographers to complete this process digitally. Photography is arguably one of the most significant inventions in history. First thought of as a merely scientific endeavor, photography has become an important art medium. For more information on the invention of photography, including daguerreotypes, please see the chapter on From the Industrial Revolution to World War I, c. 1850-1914. Modern and contemporary photographers are covered in the chapter on Contemporary Art 1960s to present.
What is Romanesque art?
Although the term itself was not used until the 19th century, Romanesque means Roman-like and is used to describe 11th through 12th century medieval art and architecture featuring Roman characteristics. The Romanesque period saw a revival in monumental architecture, sculpture, and wall painting.
What does the earliest Jewish and Christian art look like?
Most of the earliest Jewish and Christian art dates from the Hellenistic period, and takes its cues from Near Eastern and Classical, Greek and Roman, art. Early Jewish artists were forbidden from making any form that could be worshipped as an idol, and therefore avoided representational art. Early Christian art drew its symbols from Jewish tradition as well as classical tradition. A common subject in early Christian art, for example, is the Good Shepherd. In the classical tradition, the Good Shepherd represents the mythological figure Orpheus, who is shown holding a sheep around his shoulders. Early Christian artists used this as a model for early images of Christ in both sculptural and painted form. Referring to Psalm 23, which states, "The Lord is my shepherd, there is nothing I lack," Psalm 23:1. This is an example of syncretism, an art historical term which refers to the merging of meaning and imagery between different cultures and religions.
What are some significant examples of 18th century neoclassical architecture?
Chiswick House, designed and built between 1724 and 1729 by Robert Boyle. The 3rd Earl of Burlington in West London, England. Greatly inspired by the architect Palladio and his Villa Rotunda. Chiswick House features an octagonal dome and a large but simple portico with an empty pediment. The overall style is restrained, flat, and symmetrical. Pulteney Bridge, designed by celebrated Scottish architect, Robert Adam, 1728-1792. Who also designed great buildings such as the Edinburgh City Chambers and Culzean Castle in Ayrshire, Scotland. The unique, Palladian-style Pulteney Bridge, completed in 1773, crosses the River Avon in Bath, England, and is lined with shops. Théâtre de l'Odéon, originally called the Théâtre Français. This austere neoclassical building was designed by Marie-Joseph Payer between 1767 to 1770. Almost completely void of decoration. The portico features columns of the simplest Tuscan order and has no pediment. The building emphasizes its horizontality and geometric symmetry. Monticello, designed by Virginia Statements and author of the Declaration of Independence. Thomas Jefferson, as his private residence in Charlottesville between 1769 and 1782. With later redesigns between 1796 and 1908. Jefferson was interested in developing a uniquely American style of architecture that would promote patriotism and help to form the new country's national identity.
What is the Proto-Renaissance?
The Proto-Renaissance, essentially meaning pre-Renaissance, is a term art historians use to describe a change in the style of art towards the end of the Gothic period, in which art begins to foreshadow the characteristics of the Renaissance in terms of naturalism, realism, and humanism. Different art history books will cite different date ranges for the Proto-Renaissance, but it is generally considered to begin during the end of the 12th century and end during the early 14th century in Italy. Work by artists such as the Lorenzetti brothers, Simone Martini, Duccio Cimabue, and Giotto represent key shifts in style from Gothic to Renaissance. Famous writers and poets of the age include the poet Petrarch, who wrote love sonnets that went on to influence Shakespeare. Another poet, Dante Alighieri, wrote the Divine Comedy, an epic tale of the author's descent into hell.
Who was Alberto Giacometti?
Alberto Giacometti, 1901 to 1966. Was a sculptor and painter born in the Italian-speaking portion of Switzerland. During his early career, he gained critical acclaim for his surrealist sculpture. And he was a formal member of the Surrealists until he left in the 1930s. Giacometti was inspired by the philosophy of existentialism and was friends with the philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre, who even wrote a catalogue preface for one of Giacometti's Paris shows. His now iconic sculptures of bronze, skeletal human figures have been interpreted in relation to the state of society after the devastation of World War II. Interested in the experience of perception. Giacometti's lurching sculptures have also been described as shadows of the human form. In recent art auctions, his work has fetched tens of millions of dollars.
Who was Jacob van Ruysdael?
During the 17th century, landscape paintings became very popular in the Netherlands and other parts of Europe. And Jacob van Ruysdael, 1628 to 1682, was a leading landscape painter of the time. His landscapes are often dark and moody, and he preferred woodland scenes and coastal views populated with shadowy architectural structures. Examples of his expressive landscapes include the Jewish Cemetery, 1655 to 1660, Bentheim Castle, c. 1650, and Windmill at Wijkbij to Ørsted, 1660.
Who was Praxiteles?
Praxiteles was a Greek sculptor who worked in Athens during the 4th century B.C. and is considered to be one of the most important artists of the classical period. Along with sculptors Scopas and Lysippos, he is particularly well known for the Aphrodite of Cnidos, made for the Greek city of Cnidos around 350 BCE. It is thought to be the first time an artist produced a monumental female sculpture fully nude. It was common to depict the male nude, but the female form was traditionally clothed. The Aphrodite of Cnidos demands to be admired, and from multiple viewpoints. Her flesh is soft and supple and her body is delicately off balance in the contrapposto pose. With this work, Praxiteles set a new standard for depiction of the female nude. The work itself was so beautiful that the real goddess Aphrodite was said to have traveled to Cnidos and upon seeing the statue exclaimed, "Where did Praxiteles see me naked?"
What is the lightning field?
The lightning field, 1977, is an example of an earthwork, or land art, created by American sculptor Walter de Maria in western New Mexico. Built in the vast desert, de Maria installed 400 stainless steel poles with pointed tips in a grid-like pattern that reaches 1 mile by 1 kilometer in area. Each pole, at around 20 feet tall, is designed to attract lightning, as well as attract visitors. The lightning field can also be considered a sculpture or an installation. And it was designed to encourage visitors to walk amongst the poles and engage with the natural environment. This massively scaled example of land art can be visited by contacting the Dia Foundation, which manages the site.
What is art?
Since this is a book about the history of art, one might assume a definition of art itself would be straightforward. It is not. In a way, art is whatever a society identifies as such, a status often given to finely crafted works of beauty, works of religious and historic significance, and even theoretical significance. Works of art can include paintings, drawings, sculpture, and architecture, but can also include furniture, textiles, dance, performance, video, and installation pieces, among other forms. The definition of art can change quite dramatically over time, from culture to culture, and even between individuals. A painted Greek vase, for example, was not considered valuable art by ancient Greek society. Today, however, ancient Greek pottery can fetch millions of dollars. And prized examples are housed in top museums around the world. Two friends might visit a contemporary art gallery and completely disagree about the art contained within. The artist Marcel Duchamp shocked the art world when he submitted a porcelain urinal to an exhibition by the Society of Independent Artists in 1917. While the work, titled Fountain, was rejected, it is considered to be a masterpiece of the avant-garde movement, and represents a monumental shift in thinking about art in the 20th century.
What is the Hagia Sophia?
The Hagia Sophia is a centrally planned church rebuilt as part of a city-wide redevelopment project, headed by Emperor Justinian and his wife, Empress Theodora, in Constantinople during the 6th century. The ambitious design was created by two mathematically inclined architects, Anthemius of Tralles and Isidorus of Mileos, who applied their understanding of geometry, optics, and physics to the project, particularly to the enormous dome, which appeared to float. The result of their work was so magnificent that it was said angels from heaven had miraculously aided the construction. There were concerns, however, about the 40 windows that made up the dome's base.
Who were the Fauve?
Considered the first modernist movement of the 20th century, the so-called Fauve or wild beasts were a loosely associated group of artists working in Paris who used bright, garish colors in an unusually expressive way. The group included Henri Matisse, 1869–1954, André Derain, 1880–1954, and Maurice de Vlaminck, 1876–1958, among other artists known as Fauvettes. Their name came from French art critic Louis Vauxcelles, who was shocked by the brashness of the art on display at their Salon d'Automne in Paris in 1905. The Fauve used bold colors to express emotions, and they were inspired by Gauguin's use of color and Seurat's pointillist experiments in which he placed divergent colors next to one another to make them pop. A good example of the Fauvist style is Matisse's The Woman with the Hat, 1905. A painting purchased by renowned modern art collectors Leo and Gertrude Stein. Matisse used loose brush strokes and bright, seemingly inappropriate colors to construct the image of a woman holding a white fan and wearing a disproportionately large hat. The woman's nose is composed of the same green color that is splashed across the background, and her neck is deep orange. The Fauve were free from the restrictions of a realist color palette, and with this freedom they went on to experiment with other styles and help to usher in 20th century modernism.
What was the first Gothic cathedral?
The very first Gothic cathedral was the Abbey Church of St. Denis, built near Paris in the 1130s under the direction of Abbot Suger, who wrote about the design and construction of the cathedral in 3 books. The plan was to reconstruct the old Benedictine monastery that housed the holy remains of Saint Denis. Abbot Suger searched Europe for innovative sculptors and masons who experimented with rib vaults and created decorative sculpture. The result was a unified space filled with light, and it served as an inspiration for new religious architecture for centuries afterward.
What is the International Gothic style of painting?
International Gothic is a term used to describe a highly stylized form of painting popular in Europe between the late 14th century and early 15th century, which greatly influenced the art of the Northern Renaissance. It is most closely associated with the art of Bohemia, France, and the Holy Roman Empire. International Gothic styles were less popular in Italy, especially southern Italy. Paintings done in the International Gothic style feature graceful, elongated figures and extensive use of lines. While flat compared to art of the Italian Renaissance, international Gothic paintings do feature more realistic details. Some use of perspective, and an emphasis on setting and landscape.
What is the Paradise of Amitabha painting?
The Paradise of Amitabha is an 8th century wall painting within the Dunhuang caves, an important Buddhist site along the Silk Road in northwestern China. In the 9th century, the Tang Emperor Wuzong had ordered Buddhist temples and shrines to be destroyed. But Buddhist art in the Dunhuang caves survived such a fate. In the painting, the large figure seated in the center is Amitabha on a raised platform. Lesser deities and bodhisattvas dance around Amitabha. In a lavish scene that evokes the splendor of paradise.
What is the significance of the Aztec eagle man?
The Eagle Man, c. 1440 to 1469, is a 67-inch high fired clay sculpture depicting a youthful man wearing an eagle-shaped helmet and long, winged sleeves. The upper portion of the sculpture is well rendered, but overall, the body is simplistic, and it was possibly dressed in military garments. The sculpture perhaps depicts an Aztec warrior. Aztec warriors were known for their fearlessness and ferocity.
What is a kouros?
Kouros, plural kouroi, is a term used to refer to a freestanding sculpture of a young male during the archaic period of ancient Greek art. A female equivalent is known as a koure, plural kourei. These statues were usually life-size and influenced by Egyptian sculpture. A kouros faces frontally and takes a small step forward, much like the sculpture of Menkaure and a queen. The arms are held firmly at the sides and the hair is formed in long rows of stylized braids. Unlike Egyptian sculptures, male kouroi were completely nude and emphasized youth and athleticism.
What is the international style?
The international style of architecture, sometimes referred to as international modernism, began in France, the Netherlands, and Germany in the 1920s and 1930s. It spread across countries around the globe, but is most associated with Europe and the United States. It lasted until the 1970s as the preeminent modernist mode of building design. The international style was inspired by Cubism, Distigil, and elements of the arts and crafts movement. Architects working within the movement include Walter Gropius, first director of the Bauhaus, Ludwig Mies van der Rohe, Lecor Bezier, and sometimes Frank Lloyd Wright, whose later works were inspired by the international style. Buildings such as Le Corbusier's Villa Savoy, built in the village of Poissy. Outside of Paris, France, between 1920 and 1931, reflect the international style's emphasis on flat, rectilinear forms, simple decoration, and open interiors. In 1932, an exhibition called Modern Architecture, International Exhibition at the Museum of Modern Art in New York helped to promote the international style on a large scale, and gave the movement its name. Practitioners of the movement embraced industrialism and mass-produced materials such as stone, concrete, and glass. The style evolved over the course of the following decades to include monolithic glass-covered skyscrapers, such as the Lakeshore Drive Apartments, designed between 1948 and 1951 in Chicago by Van der Rohe, and the Seagram Building in New York, 1954 to 1958, also designed by Van der Rohe, with Philip Johnson.
What is an arcade?
An arcade is a series of arches, which are supported by piers or columns. Many medieval Christian churches contain interior arcades, as do many examples of Islamic architecture, including the Great Mosque at Córdoba.
What is embroidery?
Embroidery is a textile art found all over the world in which threads are decoratively sewn onto finished cloth such as wool or silk. Although the 11th century textile, the Bayeux tapestry, is referred to as a tapestry, it is actually an example of embroidery. This 230-foot-long masterpiece depicts the Norman conquest of England in 1066. For more information, see the chapter on the medieval world, c. 400-1300.
What is a menhir?
In the Celtic language, men means stone and here means long. A translation of menhir is therefore long stone. Menhirs were roughly shaped single stones likely of symbolic importance to the Neolithic people of Northern Europe who made them. An enormous arrangement of these stones, known as menhir alignments, was discovered at Carnac, in southern France, likely made around 3000 BCE. The Neolithic people of the area placed thousands of heavy menhirs in a series of rows nearly 4,000 feet long. The exact purpose of the menhir alignments at Carnac remains a mystery.
What is art for art's sake?
During the 19th century, there was, and continues to be, a debate about the role and function of art in society. The term art for art's sake was first coined by Victor Cousins, a French philosopher, and reflects the tenets of aestheticism, which is centered on the idea that there is no purpose for art other than beauty. There were some critics of this idea. Karl Marx, for example, thought that art is a reflection of social class and has the power to make political change. The foremost English art critic, John Ruskin, believed that art had both political and social significance and therefore had a purpose more far-reaching than beauty alone.
What is the raft of the Medusa?
Like Goya's 3rd of May, 1808, another early 19th century painting. The Raft of the Medusa, 1819, by French Romantic painter Théodore Géricault, 1791–1824. Emphasizes the pain and suffering of victims amidst seemingly insurmountable odds. The Raft of the Medusa is a great contemporary history painting that depicts a horrible accident at sea when a ship filled with French colonists ran aground. There were not enough lifeboats for all aboard, and so a barely floating lifeboat was built for the 152 seamen, which was eventually cut from the main lifeboat by the captain and the officers and left floating at sea. 13 days later, only 15 suffering passengers remained on the raft after withstanding disease, starvation, and cannibalism. The story caused a sensation in France, as it was discovered that the captain of the ship was an inexperienced aristocrat who was made captain through corruption. Géricault depicts the raft as the passengers spot a passing ship, their first hope at rescue. Twisted yet idealized bodies, some dead, are sprawled over the surface of the tiny wood raft while the dark, foreboding ocean looms along the horizon. The viewer's eye is brought upwards, as the raft is raised on the swell of a wave, to the outstretched arm of a frantic passenger waving a tattered red cloth, trying to get attention. The Raft of the Medusa incorporates romantic perceptions of nature with a sense of heroism, adventure, and injustice.
What were Hagia totem poles?
The Haida people lived along the Pacific coast in an area that stretched from California to Alaska. The Haida had rich traditions of weaving, carving, and sculpting, and their totem poles, which served as important representations of social status, are examples of monumental sculptures usually carved from cedar trees, a significant art form for at least 300 years. Totem poles depict images of animals or other natural object that serve as a spiritual emblem. Haida totems depict details of family lineage and social status, and were valuable enough to occasionally lead to warfare as clans disputed rightful ownership of totemic images. Haida totem poles could be placed either inside or outside, and could be as much as 60 feet tall. Outside, totem poles could be freestanding and painted, and were used to guide canoes to shore. Totem poles were also used as structural support inside houses, while shorter poles were used for burials.
What is a triumphal arch?
A triumphal arch is a large monumental structure in the shape of a freestanding arched passageway. They were used in ancient Rome to commemorate great military victories. The Arch of Titus, c. 81 CE, and the Arch of Constantine, 312 to 315 CE, are two of the most famous examples of triumphal arches in Rome. Over 50 feet tall and made of marble and concrete. The Arch of Titus was constructed after Emperor Titus conquered the city of Jerusalem. Relief carvings on the interior of the structure show Roman soldiers proudly carrying home the spoils of war, including a menorah taken from the Temple of Solomon. Built almost 300 years later, the Arch of Constantine celebrates Emperor Constantine's defeat of Maxentius at the Battle of Malvern Bridge. The event is important in Christian history as Constantine was said to have had a vision of a cross and heard the words, "In this sign you shall conquer," just before battle. Constantine's mother, Helen, was Christian, and Constantine ended legal persecutions of Christians in Rome in the Edict of Milan. The Arch of Constantine was made of partly recycled material, and incorporated relief decoration from monuments dedicated to earlier rulers such as Marcus Aurelius, Trajan, and Hadrian. Triumphal arches continue to be used to mark important historic events and can be found in cities such as Paris, New York, and Moscow.
Who was Zurbaran?
Like Velázquez, Francisco de Zurbaran, 1598 to 1664, was influenced by Caravaggio and is known for his powerful paintings of saints and martyrs, as well as his highly realistic still lifes. One of Zurbaran's most powerful paintings is Saint Serapion, 1628, which depicts the deceased saint after he sacrificed himself in exchange for captives held by the Moors. Against an inky black background, the saint's body is illuminated, leaning forward against his restraints. Powerful light reflects off of his long white robes, which look incredibly real. A similar contrast of light and dark is evident in another painting, Agnus Dei, c. 1635–1640, in which a white lamb dominates the picture plane, its feet tied in a suggestion of sacrifice. The simplicity of Zurbaran's images belies moving spiritual connotations and profound visual impact.
What impact did the Silk Road have on the ancient art trade?
During the 2nd century BCE, the Silk Road was the longest road on Earth, at over 5,000 miles. It connected the Chinese city of Luoyang with the city of Rome in western Europe and branched off to locations as far as India and Afghanistan. The journey from east to west started at Yumen, the Jade Gate. Located at the western end of the Great Wall of China. Goods would have exchanged hands many times before reaching the furthest points along the road. The road allowed ancient Romans access to painted Chinese silk and other luxury items such as ivory, gold, gems, and spices.
Who was Henry More?
Henry More, 1898 to 1986, was one of the most significant modernist sculptors, and arguably the most important British sculptor of the 20th century. His work was influenced by non-Western art, especially Mayan art. His abstractions of the human form, such as reclining figure, 1929, were directly inspired by Chicmul figures, which also recline, from Chichen Itza in Mexico. Representations of reclining forms, family groups, and mother and child pairs were an enduring subject for the artist. More's style is described as biomorphic, meaning that his figural abstractions are often soft, undulating, and organic. He also produced large sculptures that were hollow and pierced, emphasizing the mystery of negative space. More was incredibly prolific in his later years, requiring teams of assistants to produce monumental works of public sculpture, which can be seen around the globe.